In 1598, Russia's Tsar Fyodor I died heirless. His passing marked the end of the Rurikid dynasty, which had been in power for over 700 years, and this would lead the country into a period of political crisis, the time of troubles. A number of usurpers soon emerged to vie for the Russian throne, while at the same time the country was ravaged by foreign invasions and by a devastating plague. In 1613, a Grand Council was finally convened in Moscow to elect a new sovereign and put an end to disputes. Many candidates were considered, both princes of foreign monarchies and local nobles, and at the end of the day the choice fell upon a 15-year-old boy called Michael Romanov. Thereby, one of history's most famous and influential royal families had come to power. But who exactly were the Romanovs? Where did they come from, and why were they the ones elected to lead Russia? In this video, we'll be looking at the origins of the Romanov dynasty. The earliest known ancestor of the Romanovs and of many other Russian noble families was a 14th century boyar called ANDREI KOBYLA. He is documented in contemporary records only once, when in 1347 he traveled from Moscow to Tver to meet the new bride of Grand Duke Simeon of Moscow. Although this is all we know of him for certain, ANDREI would come to be assigned illustrious pedigrees by subsequent generations. In the 17th century, he was said to be of Old Prussian origin, that is to say, the Baltic people that inhabited Prussia before the Germans. His father, Glanda KOBYLA, was a famous Prussian holdout against the Teutonic Order and descended from the legendary 6th century king Widewoto. But ultimately, KOBYLA was forced to flee from his homeland and sought refuge along with his son and many subjects at the court of Alexander Nevsky in Russia. There he was baptized and received the name of Ivan. Another, somewhat later genealogy goes a step further and traces KOBYLA's lineage back to Julius Caesar. According to a modern theory, the origins of the family may be hinted at in his name. KOBYLA, which was more of a nickname than a strictly hereditary surname, means mare in Russian. Furthermore, ANDREI's known relatives also had names derived from horses and other domestic animals, suggesting that they descended from royal equerries responsible for the horses of a monarch. It is also speculated that they may have originated from a boyar family in Novgorod. ANDREI KOBYLA is known to have had 5 sons, and the Romanovs as well as the Sheremetev family descend from the youngest of these, Fyodor. Known as Koshka the Cat, he was a senior boyar in the Duma of the Muscovite rulers Dmitry Donskoy and Vasily I. The former of these was the first prince of Moscow to openly challenge Mongol authority in Russia and gained his name after winning a great victory against the Tatars on the banks of the river Don. According to some sources, Koshka was tasked with governing Moscow during Dmitry's absence in the war, and later in 1393 he was recorded as negotiating a peace with Novgorod. When Fyodor died in around 1407, he left behind 3 sons, and they would all take up the surname of Koshkin after him. Ivan Koshkin was the eldest, and served as treasurer and close confidant of Grand Duke Vasily I. He in turn had a son called Zakhary, whose descendants would go by the name of Zakharin. There were 2 lines of this family. One was called Zakharin-Yakovlev, named after his eldest son Yakov, and the other ZAKHARIN-YURIEV, after the younger son YURI. In the 1470s, Muscovite ruler Ivan III had integrated the Novgorod Republic into his realm, and in 1487 YURI was appointed as its governor. In this position he suppressed what is known as the sect of Zacharia the Jew. This movement is believed to have been founded by a Jewish scholar from Kiev who settled in Novgorod in 1470. He supposedly renounced both the Holy Trinity, the divine status of Jesus, and the immortality of the soul. In addition to this, he was against ecclesiastical hierarchy and promoted self-determination of each individual in matters of faith and salvation. In 1490, having left his post as governor, Yuri attended one of a series of church councils meant to counteract this sect by banning books and sentencing its members to death. He also took part in a number of military campaigns against Kazan and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and passed away in 1504. Yuri had 6 sons, and it's the third of them that gave the Romanov dynasty its name. Despite this, we know very little about Roman ZAKHARIN-YURIEV. He was born in around 1500 and held the title of voivod, which combined military and administrative duties. He is also thought to have been an okolnichi, the second highest rank at court after that of boyar. Having passed away around the age of 40, Roman was buried in Novospassky monastery on the outskirts of Moscow. An examination of his remains has shown that he was around 180 centimeters tall and suffered from Paget's disease, a condition which causes weakening of bones. It's speculated that this is what made him leave service in 1535. Additionally, this reconstruction of his appearance could be made based on his skull. Up until this point, Roman and his ancestors had held important positions in the Russian court and administration, but it was the marriage of one of his daughters that would set the family on track to royal power. In 1547, his daughter Anastasia married the newly crowned Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible. Anastasia is widely believed to have had a moderating influence on the young Tsar's volatile character, and the two were very attached to each other. When, after a period of illness, she passed away in summer of 1560, Ivan suffered a severe emotional collapse, after which he began to earn his nickname. He suspected that she had been poisoned by the boyars, and although there was no evidence of this, he had a number of them tortured and executed. However, when her remains were examined in the late 20th century, they were found to contain unusually high levels of mercury. In other words, Ivan's intuition may well have been right. When Ivan died in 1584, he left behind two sons, the eldest of which he had with Anastasia. This was Fyodor I, mentioned at the beginning of the video. A weak and sickly man, he was said by his father to have been more suited for a monastic life than that of a ruler. Consequently, Ivan had entrusted him to the care of a regency council made up of trusted associates. Leading it was Nikita Romanovich, Fyodor's only living uncle, and in other words, a brother of Anastasia. He was at this point old and frail, however, and was forced to leave the council by the end of the very year it had been formed. This left the Tsar's brother-in-law, Boris Godunov, practically unopposed in the council and allowed him to take control of the country. Then, when Fyodor died heirless in 1598, Boris took the final step to solidify his power and seize the throne for himself. Fyodor's much younger brother, Dmitri, had already died some years before and may have been assassinated so as not to hinder Boris's ascension to power. Despite this precaution, there was another popular candidate for the throne, the late Nikita's son, Fyodor. A cousin of his namesake, Fyodor I, he had distinguished himself both as a soldier and a diplomat. He also achieved the rank of boyar in 1583, and of special interest to us is that he was the first to take up the name of Romanov instead of ZAKHARIN-YURIEV. But being a potential threat, Boris Godunov made him and his wife take monastic vows under the names of Filaret and Martha respectively. Filaret was then taken to Sia monastery far in the Russian north and kept there under strict confinement. His rescue came in 1605, when the Godunovs were deposed by the first of a total of 3 people who would claim to be Ivan the Terrible's youngest son, Dmitri. This false Dmitri released his supposed relative from the monastery and made him Patriarch of Rostov. A few years later, in 1609, the second of the false Dmitris made Filaret Patriarch of all of Russia, though his jurisdiction only extended over the very limited area which acknowledged this impostor. A year later, Filaret was sent as ambassador to the Poles, who at the time had captured Moscow, but was imprisoned when he refused to acknowledge the Polish king Sigismund III as ruler of Russia. While he was in Polish captivity, the Russians rose up and recaptured their capital in 1612. Word was then sent out, ordering representatives of each city to convene in Moscow for the purpose of electing a new monarch. It wasn't until next year that all of them, estimated around 700 to 1500 people, arrived and finally gathered in Dormition Cathedral. Over the course of several days, they would discuss a wide range of potential candidates for the throne. One of their first decisions was not to consider any of the foreign ones, which included a Polish and a Swedish prince, but there were still a large number of Russian candidates to choose from. Eventually, the choice fell upon the Romanovs, and there are many speculations as to why. Some of the more common are that, although they came from relatively obscure origins, they had close connections with the former royal family, and unlike many other candidates, they were not tainted by cooperation with the Poles. Furthermore, Filaret enjoyed authority among the clergy, and the former supporters of the second false Dimitri hoped that he would not settle scores with them, since he himself had for a time been in the same camp. The Romanovs also had a suitable candidate that was young and inexperienced, and which the boyars hoped could be easily manipulated. The man in question was Michael Romanov, Filaret's only son. At this time, he and his mother had settled down in Kostroma, and so a delegation was sent there to inform him of the council's decision. Considering that previous tsars had either been killed or disgraced, his mother initially protested, and Michael himself is said to have been reluctant to accept the throne. But the delegation managed to convince them, and a few days later Michael left for Moscow. He was crowned on the 22nd of July 1613, although actual power largely rested with his mother, Martha, and relatives. In the following years, the Swedes and Poles were driven out of the country, and after the signing of a peace deal with the latter, Filaret was released in early 1619. After his return, he was canonically enthroned as Patriarch of Moscow and all of Russia. Filaret would then largely take over the reins of power, ruling until his death in 1633. When Michael died in 1645, he was succeeded by his son Alexis. Thus, the Romanov dynasty had been established as Russia's royal family.